Is the evidence for evolution so strong that Christians need to give up the creation account in Genesis?
Do genetic mutations lead to the evolution of one kind of an animal into another?
Stay tuned to find the answers. Welcome to Creation Magazine Live, the program that gives you answers to tough questions about science in the Bible. Did you know that evolutionists and creationists agree on pretty well every biological observation that we see in science?
Right.
It's, we see things like the founder's principle and genetic drift, natural selection. We talked about natural selection on the last program. And these are real things that we can observe, and creationists and evolutionists basically agree on what we're observing.
That's right. There isn't a single observation that evolutionists make that we would disagree with. It's
right.
about observation. That's the key word.
Right. Science is about observation. So really what we disagree on then is the outcome or the effects that we think these processes are having. And evolutionists obviously would look at natural selection and say, well, that's evidence for evolution, and creationists say, no, that's evidence for creation. It's just variation within a kind.
Right. That's what we talked about on the show last time.
Right.
Natural selection. Both creationists and evolutionists agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
No problem there. We observe natural selection acting on populations of living things.
Right.
Evolutionists would say that that is the mechanism that produces changes over millions of years.
Right.
Whereas creationists, we look at that and say it can't happen.
Right. Now
and
we
talked about that on the last show.
Right. Now this week we're talking about mutations. We see mutations happening. What exactly are mutations? That's what we're going to be talking about. Now, when I was growing up in pop culture, mutations were cool things. You saw the X-Men comics or movies and stuff like that, and you'd have somebody and all of a sudden they'd get a mutation and they'd have this ability that they never had before.
A superpower or something would make them better somehow.
That's right.
Yeah, of course, mutations, you look at science, and mutations are hardly good, and we'll be looking at that later on in the show.
Right.
Mutations are not good at all.
So really that's what we're going to be talking about today, is what mutations are and what they actually do.
The Apostle Peter made apologetics a requirement for all Christians when he wrote to always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. Christian apologetics involves both giving a reasoned defense of the Christian faith against objections and setting forth positive grounds for Christianity. In the origins debate, there is both powerful evidence against evolution and strong scientific support for the accuracy of the Genesis account of creation. Find out more at creationontheweb.org.
Creation Ministries international staff, many from a wide variety of scientific disciplines, have produced thousands of articles now available in a massive online database. www.creationontheweb.org has grown to become the world's most powerful internet resource on the creation evolution issue. There are more than 5,000 articles already online, and new articles are added daily. Some of the topics covered include the feasibility of Noah's Ark and the evidence for a global flood, the age of the earth from both the Bible and science, scientific arguments against the Big Bang and models that explain observations in astronomy within a young Earth time frame, recent discoveries that support dinosaurs fitting with biblical history, and many, many more topics. These thousands of articles are available for free 24 hours a day to anyone on Earth with an internet connection. One of the main reasons that CMI built this website is to strengthen the faith of Christians. Genesis is one of the most attacked areas of the Bible. Creationontheweb.org provides logical, scientifically accurate counterattacks in this area. As 2 Corinthians 10 verse 5 says, "We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God." Got questions? Get answers at creationontheweb.org.
Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Most evolutionists believe that two non-chickens mated, and the DNA in their new zygote contained the mutations that produced the first true chicken. Unfortunately for evolutionists, the science of genetics does not support their claim. Geneticist Dr. Lee Spetner wrote, "Not even one mutation has been observed that adds even a little information to the genome." According to the Bible, chickens came first. God created a functionally complete universe. Adam and Eve were created as mature humans, complete with the ability to communicate with God and each other.
Well, we're going to be talking about mutations, so we should probably talk about what a mutation actually is.
What is a mutation?
Right. Well, we know now that the information for life, they call it the language of life, basically DNA, is inside every living thing, and it codes for the information that is inside of every living thing, and all the structures and everything that makes you up is all encoded in your DNA.
Right, like a blueprint for a house or something like that.
Right.
There's an instruction code for how to build a living thing inside the DNA.
Exactly. Now, when it makes copies of itself sometimes there's copying errors. So there's mistakes that are made in that process, and that's exactly what a genetic mutation is. So to put that in easy terms, I guess that's like me saying, I've got a book and I give it to you and I say, make a copy of that, please. Well, as you're making a copy of that, you could make some errors, right? You could forget a letter or a word or even a paragraph.
If I handwrite it and not use a photocopier.
Right, right. And even if you use a photocopier, sometimes they fade. But so it's just an error in a copying process, so that's what a genetic mutation is. So for an evolutionist, he would say, well, during that process, when there's these copying errors, maybe new information is generated by the removal or the changing of the genetic information that's there.
That's the idea.
Right.
Mutations are supposed to be the answer for how new information can be added to the DNA to build all these bigger and better structures to fulfill the promise of evolution. That you can start with a simple living thing like a simple living cell that evolved 3 billion years ago from a pool of chemicals in the ocean, and it didn't have the information for anything. Well, only a few things, just the basic principles of life. We're told this is the story of evolution. That's what we're told. And then through mutations, mostly, this is supposed to be the savior for evolutionists, mutations produce the information that builds these bigger and better things.
Right, because ultimately evolution should be able to show that supposedly in the story, you had a lizard and it evolved into a bird. Well, the bird doesn't have genetic information for wings and feathers and hollow bones and all those kind of things. So somehow there must be some mechanism that adds this genetic information that never existed before to this creature and transforms it. This is what we're told.
And evolutionists say that's mutations.
Right.
That's the role of mutations in the evolutionary story. Well, we're going to look at some science today and look at what geneticists are saying, and you discover that what evolutionists would like mutations to do, science says that's not what mutations do.
Let's take a look at some pictures of some observed mutations. So this isn't a story about what we think happened in the past. These are some pictures of things that have actually been mutated.
To give folks an idea of what mutations can do in the real world. Right.
Well, here's an interesting mutation. It's a two-headed snake. So when you look at that, what's happened to that snake? Is there any new information? There's a mutation there. We can observe it. But is there any new information that was never there before?
Well, it had the information to build one head, and then it built two heads. No new information. It's just been duplicated. Same information copied over again.
So it's kind of like a glitch in the copying processes, and you get two instead of one. But it hasn't grown wings or any kind of structure that never existed before.
Right. Or it hasn't necessarily copied. I said copied. That's not necessarily true. There may be something that said, instead of building one head, a slight change in the information got garbled somehow. Build another head over here. Not necessarily copying information.
Yeah. And we can see things like that even happening with there's a two-headed pineapple. Same type of problem. Now, You know, we can see mutations. I'm not sure if people remember thalidomide. I don't know if you remember thalidomide. It was a drug that was administered to pregnant women, I believe, in the 50s in Canada, and it caused a lot of birth defects. It caused a lot of mutations. And what actually happened is you'd have, you know, children being born with, let's say, you know, the hand growing out of the shoulder. Right. Yeah. The information for the arm had been deleted from. You know,
terrible problems.
Yeah, really, really bad things. So, in our next example here, we see a snake, and it's an albino snake. It doesn't have information for color anymore. So it's kind of like the same thing. It's like a, you know, thalidomide. It's actually got the information for its color removed, and so that's not an addition of information again.
It's switched off somehow.
Right.
It's not. It doesn't have the ability to produce that color in that particular example.
Yeah, and this is probably going to be a real treat for fishermen out there. Maybe you think, hey, this is twice as many chances to catch this guy.
A fish with two mouths.
Yeah, yeah. But again, you know, we look at mutations. Is that a good thing? Well, the bottom mouth doesn't actually even work. It's just sort of there. Again, you've got this glitch in DNA, and it's produced two mouths instead of one. But that's like me handing you 2 copies of a newspaper, no new information.
It somehow duplicated the information.
Right, right. So now we've been taking animals and trying to mutate them for a long time. You know, fruit flies and mice. We do a lot of horrible things with creatures in experiments, I guess. And here you can see a mouse that's been you know, irradiated, like, you know, because that's supposedly going to create mutations which are going to cause evolution. And we get rats with like no fur, cancerous tumors, a lot of different things. These are actually observable experiments. The fruit fly there, we've been zapping him for a while because they reproduce quickly. So we can get many generations, so we can see if they're going to be evolving or things like that.
Most of the reasons scientists do these is they're looking for evolutionary answers. They're looking for some support for their notion about the evolutionary story, that mutations are the mechanism that produce these new features.
Right. But
doesn't really work.
Yeah, the results are far from what they're looking for, because you can get a fruit fly with you know, no wings or crumpled wings, or a double set of wings that don't work, or you can even get a fruit fly with its leg growing out of its eye. But it's not. Okay. Yeah, you can do that.
But it's not adding any information.
Right.
They already had legs. They already had eyes. They're growing things in different places.
Right.
All
you're doing, it's kind of like dropping DNA in a blender, and you know, you just get this messed up fruit fly. That's what we actually observe with mutations. So again, this is no help to the theory of evolution, because you're not getting the fruit fly turning into a wasp or anything different than what it is. You're just taking its structure and rearranging it. In most cases, it's not very good for the
right. Yeah. We've got a magazine here, one of the Creation magazines that, of course, this show is named after, Creation Magazine Live. On the back cover of this magazine, you can get it, see it here. I don't know if we can get a shot of that. There's Something More or Something Less is the title of the article, and the cat here has lost its tail. That's something less, and the sheep here has grown an extra set of horns.
Right.
So there are some more examples, just to give some more examples of what mutations do.
So an evolutionist would say, well, see, we see these changes in living things. See, these things have changed, so they're evolving.
What's interesting is these things and other examples like this, and the examples we've shown, are sometimes written up in the media as evidence of mutations beneficial to evolution.
Right.
Look, it's changed. Yes, it's changed. Sure, it's changed. This cat, in this case, has lost the information to build a tail. So something went wrong with the information to build a tail. It's a mutation. Right. In the case of the sheep here, it grew an extra set of horns. In this case, the horns, and it's discussed in this article, the horns are actually a hindrance to the sheep.
Eating and stuff, they get in the way.
They get in the way, that's right.
Right.
So again, all kinds of examples of mutations, and evolutionists are saying this is what is supposed to produce those bigger and better features, those structures that move evolution forward.
So that's what Creation Ministries does with the magazine here. Here's another issue of Creation Magazine, and there was an article on the back here. And
well, that's pretty.
Yeah, it says, not a leg to stand on, and it shows a cow that's grown a 5th leg. However,
out of its neck?
Out of its neck.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a nasty mutation.
And it just kind of hangs there, like it's not.
It's not functional. It's not going to let it run quicker or eat with that leg or anything like that. Again, it's just misplaced information. So it's a corruption DNA. So really when we're talking about mutations, you know, like I said earlier, I used to think, because I didn't grow up as a Christian or in a Christian household,
right.
I just grew up as an atheist, and I just believed in evolution, that I'd always been told, oh, well, these mutations must add things, because that's just the way it was portrayed to me. See, it's evolved, it's changed, and now it can do something that it never could do before.
I mean, you grew up with comic books as well. You were saying earlier that, I mean, these mutations were supposed to be a good thing.
Right.
In the comic books, they're a good thing.
Right.
But when we look at examples in the real world, like often come through Creation Magazine, you just don't see mutations producing good things like you read about in the comic books.
Exactly,
Right?
yeah.
It just doesn't happen.
So I guess what we're going to do in a little while is really get into some examples, because of course evolutionists will say, no, there have been examples of, you know, beneficial mutations and information that wasn't there before, and so we're really going to dig into that a little more and see if those stories are true.
That's right. We'll talk to some geneticists and look at different things like that, and just look at mutations. We've given some examples here already. We'll look at that.
When sequences of DNA which did not appear to code for protein were discovered, some evolutionists suggested that these represented junk or vestigial DNA, leftovers of our supposed evolutionary ancestry. However, researchers the world over are confirming that non-coding DNA holds critical clues to a vast range of diseases. A leading figure in genetics, Professor John Maddox said, "The failure to recognize the implications of the non-coding DNA will go down as the biggest mistake in the history of molecular biology." For details, see creationontheweb.com/DNA complex.
When Dr. Carl Whelan started Creation Magazine in his home in 1978, little did he realize that today it would reach into some 140 countries all around the world and have such a huge impact in so many lives. This unique 56-page full-color family magazine refutes evolution and gives God the glory for the amazing creation we see all around us. It gives you the answers to defend your faith and uphold the true history of the world found in Genesis. Creation Magazine is an essential tool for anyone wanting to immunize their family against the anti-biblical worldviews bombarding us from all sides. With no paid advertising, every page in Creation Magazine is full of powerful articles, ammunition to intelligently discuss nature, history, science, the Bible, and related subjects. Although written for lay people, every effort is made to ensure that the content is technically accurate so that even experts are satisfied. And young children look forward to the section written especially for them. The exciting articles also provide great witnessing material that you won't find anywhere else. Many have come to faith in Christ because of subscribers sharing this magazine with them. So subscribing not only boosts your faith, it enables you to get biblical truth into your community in a special way. Subscribe today and have it delivered to your home every 3 months. Visit www.creationontheweb.com for subscription information, or call the CMI office nearest you.
Welcome back. As promised, we want to talk about some actual mutations that have been observed and studied by geneticists. And one of those mutations, and our speakers use these as they travel across the country, and speakers in the other CMI offices around the world also use this, the example of H. pylori. H. pylori is a bacteria that lives in your stomach, and it eats the lining of your stomach. If you have too many of them, you get ulcers. Right?
Not a good thing.
Eats through the lining of your stomach.
Right.
The way this is controlled is there's an antibiotic which has been developed that when the antibiotic is applied, it's absorbed into the cell through the membrane, into the bacteria, and the bacteria produces an enzyme, a chemical, that converts the antibiotic into a poison.
Right. So we take advantage of the enzyme that it already has in it.
Right. And that's what kills the bacteria, and it works very well. However, there is a known mutant variety of this same H. pylori bacteria.
Right.
And in the mutant variety, it's lost the ability to produce that chemical, that enzyme.
Right.
And so when the antibiotic is applied, it's not converted into a poison, into a toxin.
Right.
and the bacteria lives. So it lived because it lost the ability to do something. There was a mutation.
So it's kind of like a thalidomide H. pylori. It lost something it used to have in its information.
Right. It lost something, and evolutionists are looking at that and other similar examples and saying, this is a benefit to evolution.
Right.
See, because now if you have the normal variety of the bacteria and the mutant variety side by side, when the antibiotic is applied, the normal variety dies, the mutant variety goes on to make more copies of itself, and before you know it, you have an entire strain of bacteria which is now resistant to the antibiotic.
Right. So an evolutionist would say, and they would use terminology like, look, it's evolved resistance to the
they use those kinds of words, exactly.
Right, and I always used to translate that into, oh, it's got something new that it never had before, or you know, evolved in such a way that it's got new genetic information that never before existed.
It's somehow gotten bigger and better and meaner and overcome somehow the antibiotic. But that's not what happened. In this case, which has been studied, this isn't a hypothetical case, it's been studied, and that's what happened. The mutation produced a loss of an ability, and that loss of an ability produced a survival advantage. You know what, we could call that a beneficial mutation.
Right.
I don't think creationists would have a problem with beneficial mutations. That's a beneficial mutation. It's beneficial for the bacteria. It's not beneficial for the carrier of it, obviously.
And it's not beneficial to the theory of evolution, because it's completely opposite direction for what they would be trying to hopefully show, is that one type of creature could eventually turn into something else over time. So it's not really the type. It's not really that there's changes in things. It's what types of changes in things that we're pointing out.
The change in some cases can even be huge.
Right.
For example, I'm just thinking of the wingless beetles on a windy island, right? And we've written on this, creationontheweb.org. You can type in wingless beetles and get this article, and it appeared in Creation magazine in years past. There's a windy island that has beetles on it. A lot of these beetles have wings, and a lot of the beetles, apparently what happens is when they fly, they get blown off into the ocean, they die. There was a mutation in the beetles on this windy island that produced, in this mutation, produced the loss of the ability to produce wings. So you have these wingless beetles, which now crawl around and they don't fly. That's a survival advantage because, on that island, because they don't fly and the wind doesn't blow them off into the ocean and they die.
Right.
It's not evolution. Because they're not getting better in an evolutionary sense.
They used to have wings, they lost wings.
They've lost the ability to produce wings.
That would be like me having arms. Now I don't have arms, but somehow because of the environment that helps me survive.
Right.
But it's actually devolution then.
It's going backwards. It's the opposite of what evolution would predict. That new, never before existing genetic information is produced through mutations. That's the story. But when you look at actual examples like the H. pylori bacteria, it just isn't there.
So the experts are saying then that, no, with what we observe, and really that's what we're told over and over again is, you know, evolution is a science, or it's scientific, it's been observed and stuff like that. But really we got to look at the terminology there. Yeah, there's change, but is it evolution in the sense that one thing can actually turn into something else?
And it's not the quantity of change. Sometimes there's a massive change, like beetles losing the wings. It's a fairly large change. The morphological change is fairly large. They've lost their wings. But it's not evolution. The amount of change isn't even the real key issue. Is new information being added? I've got a quote here from Dr. Lee Spetner, a Jewish geneticist. He's not a Christian. He's a Jewish scientist, but he believes Genesis. And we've got some quotes here. He's a geneticist, studies mutations. And here's this quote from Dr. Lee Spetner. All point mutations that have been studied on the molecular level turn out to reduce the genetic information and not to increase it. Not even one mutation has been observed that adds a little information to the genome.
Wow. So this is a guy who's studied genetics. We carry his book, Not by Chance. He's not a Christian, but he just says that when you look at actual observed mutations, we haven't found one yet that's added new information to the genome. So that's a pretty powerful statement. You know, there's many evolutionists out there that are, you know, really trying to ring the bell, I guess, for evolution, and one of the biggest ones, of course, is Richard Dawkins. And Richard Dawkins, if you've never heard of him, He's probably the most vocal proponent of atheistic evolution on the planet. He just had a 2-hour BBC special called The Root of All Evil, where he said that basically people of faith positions, particularly Christians, we're the root of all evil, where if we could just get rid of religious wars and stuff like that, everything would be better.
He's promoting his book, The God Delusion.
The God Delusion, yeah. The God Delusion, he's promoting that book. And basically he calls himself a bright. He says, he's bright, and I guess people of faith positions, then I assume he's assuming we're dull. But anyway, he just...
Is that what he means?
Well, that's what he calls himself, a bright.
He's a bright. Well, that's the first time I've heard that.
Well, he's said many things like, that basically if you don't believe in evolution,
Yes,
you're basically
that's all over his book and his radio shows.
Right, you're just
there's something wrong with you.
Right,
seriously wrong is what he believes.
So anyway, it's always interesting to show people from evolutionists' own mouths just what they know about our, the things they're trying to promote.
That's
so
right.
we're going to show.
Years ago, a film crew went to the home of Professor Dawkins,
right,
in Oxford, there in England, and we've got that video clip here.
Yep.
It's from one of the videos that we carry, From a Frog to a Prince, and the interviewer here asks Dawkins a very simple question. We'll just play the clip, and
right,
and folks listening can see Dawkins' answer to this simple question.
Professor Dawkins, can you give an example of a genetic mutation or an evolutionary process which can be seen to increase the information in the genome?
Did you get that?
I did. There was a lot of silence there.
A lot of silence. He looks at the wall, looks at the floor. It should be a simple question to answer. Can you give an example, a single example, of where you've observed information being increased?
Right.
And he can't.
I mean, that's the key question, really. Like you said, he should have a very ready example. He should be able to say...
There should be thousands of examples of this happening,
right,
and it just isn't there.
I've got a quote from Dr. Dawkins here, because he was doing a talk at Oxford University, and in a speech, he was explaining his intellectual commitment to Darwinian evolution as his belief in the explanation of human origins. And he said his statement, he said, "We don't need evidence, we know it to be true." Now that's kind of interesting, because Mr. Dawkins is on record saying that, we have all this evidence for evolution.
There's all kinds of evidence, right.
And when he's asked a key question, he really doesn't have it. But it even gets better. In December 2004, he was on Bill Moyer's show Now. And Moyers asked him, is evolution a theory, not a fact? And his answer was, evolution has been observed, it's just that it hasn't been observed when it's happening. Now, that's an interesting statement.
I love that. That's just I mean, you know what? Dawkins is one of my favorite atheists.
He makes our job easy.
So evolution has been observed, it's just that it hasn't been observed while it's happening.
See, the key statement there is, it hasn't been observed.
Right.
He said, well, it's been observed, but it hasn't been observed. Well, it hasn't. He's admitting it hasn't been observed. And this is what we've been telling people for many years, is evolution is a faith position, not pure science. Just like I can't prove special creation, you can't prove evolution.
Yet in the media reports, people are saying, we've observed evolution, we see this happening,
right,
there's mountains of evidence of the animals changing all around us.
That's right.
And here's the mechanism, it's mutations. But when we look at the real world of science, it just isn't there. We'll be right back.
Some people believe that aliens from distant planets may hold the key to understanding the mysteries of life. However, belief in life in outer space is rooted in belief in the theory of evolution. A popular pro-ET website says, over the last half-century, scientists have developed a theory of cosmic evolution that predicts that life is a natural phenomenon likely to develop on planets with suitable environmental conditions. In other words, if it happened here, it must have happened elsewhere. But repeatable science shows evolution didn't happen here. There is a message from a higher intelligence that tells us the real solution to life's mysteries. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life.
What does the migratory flight of a golden plover have in common with a postcard? What's the common factor between a computer program and hieroglyphics? And what property is shared between the processes taking place in living cells and the message of the Bible? The distinctive common quality in all of these cases is information. Dr. Werner Gitt, a prolific author and lecturer, presents possibly the strongest argument against a naturalistic explanation for the origin of life. In his book, In the Beginning Was Information, the current materialistic representations of information are criticized, and a new model for the origin of life is derived. Dr. Gitt holds an engineering degree from the Technical University in Hanover, Germany, and a doctorate from the Technical University Aachen. From 1978, he was a director and professor in the field of information science at the Federal Institute for Physics and Technology in Brunswick. There would be few people alive more qualified to present this watertight argument against the theory of evolution. Learn why information theory virtually eliminates any possibility for an evolutionary explanation of origins.
Now let's look at some things that have been happening in the news recently that kind of relate to mutations and evolution and so on. We'll look at we've looked at what scientists are talking about and what we observe out there in the world of the real world of mutations, and when we study these things, when scientists study these things, the results they're getting. Now let's look at some of these news reports that often give a different story.
Because you're right, you mentioned before how it's in the news all the time. That's why our ministry does what it does, because we're trying to counteract what the culture's constantly just throwing out there, saying, oh, we've observed evolution happening.
Right. So there's this one article, Japanese researchers find dolphins with the remains of legs. Remains of legs. That's the title of the article. The article goes on to say, fossil remains show dolphins and whales were four-footed land animals about 50 million years ago and share common ancestors with hippopotamuses and deer. Scientists believe they later transitioned to an aquatic lifestyle and their hind limbs disappeared. Though odd-shaped protrusions have been found near the tails of dolphins, so now they're odd-shaped protrusions. First they were the remains of legs. Now they're odd-shaped protrusions. Found near the tails of dolphins and whales captured in the past. Researchers say this was the first time that one had been found with well-developed symmetrical fins. Now they're calling this one. Now they're fins. They're not legs anymore. Now they're fins.
So they've evolved. They've gone from remains of legs to protrusions to fins.
So, I mean, here we have an example where the headline seems to be very evolutionary. A dolphin with legs? What? Dolphins don't have legs, they have fins.
Right.
They have the title of the article says legs.
Yeah.
But when you read the body of the text, it doesn't say legs, it says fins. Right. An extra set of well-developed symmetrical fins is what the article is saying.
Right.
The second set of fins, much smaller than the dolphin's front set of fins, are about the size of human hands and protrude from near the tail of the dolphin's underside.
So, when you boil it all down, a dolphin with fins really isn't that exciting. But if you preface it with saying that they're the remains of legs, and then you talk about how, we believe they evolved from hippopotamuses and deer or whatever send in there, then
you've got that evolutionary spin put on the data.
Right.
I mean, there's observation, and we'll talk about this in probably all of the shows that we're going to do.
Yeah.
There's observation, there's the facts, and then there's all this different spin that's put on them.
Right.
I mean, not to throw everything back at the evolutionists, but we put a spin on it as well. A biblical
exactly.
spin,
exactly.
which we believe is the correct spin.
Right.
You look at the observations, and in the living things, and how rock layers form, or whatever, the life of a comet, or whatever it might be, whatever observation we're making. When we talk about the origin of that particular observation, we're going to be talking about how it fits with the Bible.
So here, if you were to take that news article and you were to boil down the facts are they found a dolphin with an extra set of fins.
An extra set of fins.
That's the facts that you're dealing with. And everything other than that is a philosophy or a story about what we think happened in the past to get us to the point where we've got a dolphin with an extra set of fins.
The problem is you've got all these news reports, report after report after report, with all this evolutionary spin on it. And a lot of Christians, and I would put myself in this category years ago, a lot of Christians don't know where to make the distinction between what was really observed and what is evolutionary speculation.
Right.
And so it seems as though there's all this support out there for evolutionary theory. It's very difficult to get through. And again, as you said before, that's one of the reasons that our ministry exists.
Right. To separate facts from
that's right. You've
from
got
theory.
another article.
Yep. This one was titled "Evolution in Action: Crickets in Hawaii Evolve Silent Wings." Now that's the title. Okay, so you start off and it says they've evolved silent wings.
Silent wings.
Because you know crickets, they rub
make
their
that little sound,
crick, crick, crick,
in
like
your bedroom at night.
and you can never find the thing. Anyway, it actually started off and it said creationists like to complain that evolution cannot be observed and that this is a sign that evolution isn't real science. Yes, and we do make that statement that if you haven't observed it, why are you calling it, a scientific theory?
That's right.
Anyway, it says, unfortunately for the creationists, this claim is false. They said our claim is false. Evolution can be and has been observed. It says significant examples of evolution in action may not occur every day, but they do occur. Okay? It says, unfortunately for scientists, though, creationists tend to deny or dismiss these examples, no matter how many different ways evolution is demonstrated to occur out in nature. Creationists find some excuse for not accepting what's happened right before everyone's eyes. Sometimes they'll even go so far as to deny the standard definition of evolution in biology in order to avoid accepting the truth. Now, this was the preface to the article. Because what they're saying, and look what they're saying. Look, we're denying observation. But we're not. Let's go to the observation.
Yes, it's a straw man argument. But
yeah, they're setting it up.
That's how it starts.
So this is what happens if you read the whole article. In Hawaii, there's these crickets, and they've got a mutation, and they no longer, their wings can no longer make that sound.
Okay.
Now the problem is for them is that's the way they attract a mate. So if you can't make your little crick crick crick, you know what? You don't procreate.
It sounds like an evolutionary dead end.
Well, that's exactly what the problem is, and they go on to explain that because they make no noise, the only way they're able to survive so far is to find a normal, healthy cricket, and when it's doing its thing there, calling out to the ladies, he has to come near, and so then when the female arrives, then he'll have a chance to have a mate. He actually has to find a normal, healthy one, and that's how he's going to be able to carry on.
And so it's written up in the media as evidence for evolution in action.
Evolution in action. Now, they used to have the ability to make this sound. They've evolved silent wings. If there was no healthy ones around, they'd go extinct because they can't procreate. And they're saying that we're denying observation. We're saying, no, let's go to science. Let's go to the observation. Forget the straw man argument. Creationists are often portrayed as people who just, we don't want to talk about science. We're just going to talk about the Bible and impose our views on people and stuff like that.
We think God created all the animals in exactly the form we see them today, and so on. They don't change over time. They do change over time.
Exactly.
We're not denying the observations that they change, but they don't change in a way that's beneficial to evolution.
Exactly. So it's just interesting how so many times, in my opinion, we don't get the airtime. Oftentimes in debates or in news reports, I will often see these prefaces talking about, creationists as just maybe, I don't know, Bible thumpers who really don't want to examine the evidence. We're saying examine the evidence. That's why we carry all the books and DVDs that we do when we go around.
That's why we employ scientists. I mean, why would a Christian ministry employ scientists to do research and look at some of these things if, in fact, we want to censor all the observations? Observations are what we need.
That's right. So in the upcoming segment, what we're really going to do is we're going to get a little deeper into this concept of information and DNA and what mutations actually do. And we really do want to examine the evidence and the facts and dig deeper so that people can actually see the evidence that's out there.
The giraffe's heart is one of the most powerful among animals today. It needs to produce enormous pressure to get blood all the way up its long neck to its brain. This is powerful evidence for a creator because with such high blood pressure, only special design features around its brain prevents it from blowing its mind when it bends down to take a drink. This is a problem for evolutionists to explain, because without these special features, a giraffe bending over the first time to take a drink would die. But if the neck was shorter in the past, then it wouldn't need the special features. This means that the giraffe must have been designed with all of its features at once, just like the Bible says. For details, see creationontheweb.com/giraffe.
Although author Michael Behe, professor of biochemistry, does not write from a literal Genesis viewpoint, his book, Darwin's Black Box, presents powerful arguments against the popular evolutionary explanations for life. Using many detailed examples from his field of expertise, Behe shows that the biochemical world comprises an arsenal of chemical machines made up of finely calibrated, interdependent parts. Behe shows that the professional literature is completely silent on how such incredibly complex machines could have arisen by Darwin's gradualistic paths. He thoroughly challenges Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection and random mutation and shows it fails to account for the origin of the astonishingly complex biomolecular systems through the concept of irreducible complexity. Focusing on 5 phenomena: blood clotting, cilia, the human immune system, transport of materials within the cell, and the synthesis of nucleotides, he shows systems that are irreducibly complex, with no gradual step-by-step Darwinian route possible. His conclusion is that at the biochemical level, scientists have no option but to believe in intelligent design.
So we were talking about observation and mutations, and we're talking about, the scientific, facts that we can study, and how both a creationist and an evolutionist will then take the facts and interpret it via their model and come to conclusions.
When we're talking about origins,
right?
I mean, we talked about different kinds of science in one of the past shows, and as it pertains to origins, if we're talking about where a particular process came from, or how a living thing came to be, or a particular feature that we see, mountains or rivers or canyons or whatever, when we're talking about origins, there things go a little bit different,
right?
Because we have to interpret data as it relates to the past. The facts do not speak for themselves.
Right.
So we're talking about mutations here today.
So the facts now we're discovering with DNA, because our technology is getting a little more sophisticated, is really that, they used to think DNA was just like a linear code. It was just these chemicals that, were basically in a row, and that you could, start from here and go to here, and that would perhaps code for, the color of your hair, or the shape of your feet, or
so
something
very much
like that.
Like reading a book.
Like reading a book. That's right.
You could just reading a book.
You just go along in a linear fashion and stuff. But what they found now is that it's far more complicated than that. So picture starting here and going to here, and that being a segment of that information being the information for a certain gene. What they found now is that if you start from here and read to here in an overlapping sense, it will code for information for something entirely different.
For a different type of chemical, different type of amino acid or something.
Yeah, well, different type of proteins, different types of structures.
Right.
So you've got this overlapping information now. So to put it in the book analogy, that would be like writing a book, the Three Little Pigs or something like that. But if you started halfway through the story and were able to go beyond the end of the book and put more words in there,
right,
you'd have like,
a completely different story.
Completely different story. The Three Little Pigs, and you got Little Red Hen or something like that, completely overlapping. I mean, imagine trying to do that, trying to write a book, or even a short story, where you've got good punctuation and all that stuff, but if you start in a different area and you go on from there, you've got a completely different bit of information. That's pretty staggering.
And what about reading it backwards?
Well, that's right.
Isn't that that's similar to what happens in the DNA too, isn't it?
That's right, because you can have overlapping information, in this fashion, but you can also start here and read backwards and get completely different information coded. Now, this creates a huge problem for the theory that mutations can add information.
Right, because now you're not just mutating. If you mutate one of the chemical letters on the DNA, you're not just mutating
one
the coding
piece of information.
One piece of information.
Right, because what they're thinking now is that the actual shape, when the DNA is coiled up, you've got cross-coding going on now, because So it's just getting more and more and more complicated all the time. Picture, I don't know if anybody's played word find. Where you've got sort of a grid, and you've got all these letters in there, and they give you a bunch of words that you have to find.
Right,
so,
they look like they're all jumbled up.
Right, but you get, you start,
yeah.
there's the word, creation, and there's the word magazine, or whatever, and you're trying to find these words, but the words can go this way, they can go horizontally, they can go vertically, they can go backwards, they can go forwards. So this is kind of an analogy to what we're finding in the DNA coding now. It isn't just this long linear code. The information is overlapping. So picture, doing a word find, and you've got, let's say, 3 words that intersect each other. So you've got your grid, and word here, word here, word here. But where the intersection point is, you mutate that letter, or you delete it, or you replace it with a different letter. Well, you haven't just corrupted one piece of information. You've corrupted 2 or 3 or however many pieces of information are cross-coding there.
Right. And actually, that's a fairly simplistic example, this example of a word find.
Right.
It's more like the game of Sudoku. Don't know how many people would be familiar with that. It's growing in popularity today.
Yeah.
You have 9 sets of grids. Mm-hmm. 3, and 3.
Yeah.
And inside each one of those squares is another set of 9 squares.
Right.
So each row and each column needs to have the numbers 1 to 9 in it.
Right.
In each row and each column, and each little square of the 9 squares need to have the numbers 1 to 9 in each one of those.
So that's how you win if you can get 1 to 9.
Right.
Right.
And if you change one of the numbers in one of the squares, it's going to affect pretty much the whole game, your whole game board.
Right.
And so that's even a more accurate example, if we're thinking of analogies to try to communicate the complexity in the DNA.
Right.
That's a more accurate example.
So, simply because evolutionists have said that, okay, if you've got a word and you change one of the letters, you could create and replace it with a different letter, you could create new information. Well, okay, we've never seen one example of that actually happen.
So there's no observation.
There's
but
no
this
observation.
Is still the evolutionary story.
Right. So what they're saying is, well, yeah, it may have happened in the past. Well, that's a faith position.
Sure.
Because if we haven't seen it happen, it's not real observable science. But even to keep the theory alive, right, then you would have to say, okay, well, is it possible that could happen? Well, with the complexity of DNA that we're finding now, to replace or add a letter that wasn't there before, that's why we're getting these, in my opinion, you're seeing so many more birth defects, and you're seeing that really play out in our genetics. Our genetics aren't doing this, they're not evolving, they're actually devolving.
Right.
And we're seeing that happen
We
over
get
time.
more and more mutations. We're finding problems with all kinds of things. We have these allergies now, and some people are linking that to the degradation, perhaps genetically, of humans.
Exactly. Now, it's interesting what the culture's doing, though. I know even some of the occult, what we consider occult religions or whatever you're doing, it's interesting. One of the most asked questions we get, of course, is where did Cain get his wife?
Where did Cain get his wife if he wasn't able, and things like that?
That's right.
Very, very popular question. Over and over again we get that question. And the answer, of course, that most people are thinking initially is, well, he would have married one of his sisters.
Right.
But then, even though that's the correct answer, some other questions come up, and it relates to mutations. Well, wait a minute. There'd be problems in the offspring.
Right.
So that can't possibly be the answer.
Right.
And it is the answer, but if we think about these mutations, they've crept in over time. The Bible says that Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel, and Cain went somewhere and got his wife, went to the land of Nod, wherever that was, and found a wife. Where'd she come from? Actually,
he said he knew his wife.
He knew his wife, and most people would say that there was other people groups living, but that leads to other problems because theologically other problems. That's right. Because if those other people groups were living somewhere else at the time of Adam and Eve, that means they weren't descendants of Adam and Eve. If you're not a descendant of Adam, you haven't inherited the sin nature.
Right.
Jesus Christ came as the last Adam.
That's right.
To change the sin nature.
Right.
For all the descendants of Adam who've inherited the sin nature. If you haven't inherited the sin nature, Jesus Christ can't save you.
Right.
So it's a problem. Some Bible colleges have taught their missionaries in training, I don't know if they still do this, but they did years ago, don't go to that particular people group over there. They're not descendants of Adam. They can't be saved.
Yeah.
Huge problem.
Huge problem.
So what's the answer? When we look at mutations, talking about mutations and so on, today, if close relations marry,
right,
it is a problem.
Yeah.
Right?
because I know that the Wiccans, the witches, have produced literature that have said, actually go around and talk to Christian kids in schools. Like they teach their teenagers to go talk to Christian kids and pose that question. Where did Cain get his wife? He couldn't have married his sister because we can see from modern genetics that there would be birth defects.
Yes.
He couldn't have married her. But what we're seeing is a degradation of the information in our genome.
Scientists tell us we have about 1,500 mistakes in our genes right now.
And they're increasing. It's called genetic load.
I see them when I look in the mirror. Well, I mean, some of those are simple, right? Our noses aren't quite straight, our ears aren't quite right. Sometimes internally things don't work quite right. We have things like cystic fibrosis and other things, mutations in the genes.
Right. But if we can see this happening to our DNA, then logically, if you reverse that and you go back in time, you get to a point where there's less and less and less and less and less mutations till you get to the point in the beginning, God creates everything and everything is good.
No mutations.
No mutations. Sin enters, the corruption. See, I think a lot of Christians think, oh, well, the fall of man. The fall of man affected everything. It affected the entire creation.
The whole creation groans and travails in pain. That's
exactly.
Right.
And people don't link that sometimes to, well, yeah, why do we see these things happening and stuff like that? So even the Wiccans are using these things to proselytize Christian kids. And if you don't have answers, there's a big problem there.
So the answer to where Cain got his wife, well, he married a sister. There weren't biological defects initially. Today there are, because chances are you have mistakes in the same places.
Right.
If you marry someone close in relation to you, if you marry someone further away, you don't get the same mistakes.
Right.
But
so basically, what we're finding is science fits with God's word, and we can answer those questions.
That's right.
Since Eve was formed out of a rib from Adam, some Christians have grown up believing that men have one less rib than women, which they don't. Some anti-creationists have used this to mock Genesis. But today, if someone loses their hand, it doesn't mean that their children will be born without hands. Interestingly, ribs are one of the few bones in the body that can grow back if removed, as long as the periosteum, the tissue around the bone, is left intact. So even Adam would have had the same number of ribs as everyone else.
Finding answers to questions about the origins debate. Creation or evolution? When the results are in, which one is supported by scientific observations? Find out at creationontheweb.org. Creation scientists and researchers from around the world have contributed more than 5,000 articles, many of which appeared in leading creationist publications like Creation Magazine and the Journal of Creation over more than 30 years. A new daily front page article keeps web visitors informed about the latest breaking news in the creation-evolution debate. When news breaks about the latest evolutionary ape man, or some major supposed evidence for evolution, check out creationontheweb.org for a Christian creationist response. Each weekend, the website features a feedback article, a response to web visitors' email feedback. Often, the anti-creationist arguments in skeptics' emails are refuted in a detailed response by a CMI staff member. So in a very practical way, believers can see that the Bible, and particularly Genesis, can be defended against skeptics' arguments. The website includes an online store where you can browse through hundreds of the world's leading creationist books, DVDs, and related materials, all available to build up the faith of the believer. Got questions? Get answers at creationontheweb.org.
Well, what we're going to do now is go to some feedback that we get from our website. People, email in.
People write in.
If people have questions or comments, they can, send them to the website, and we do our best to answer them. There are some stipulations there on how you present information to the ministry, and you can read about that online on the website, creationontheweb.org. But you can submit questions and comments and stuff like that. So really, in this segment, that's what we like to address. We've got a letter here from Steve from the United States. And this is what his letter said. It said, "Evolution does not presuppose no God. It merely attempts to discern the mechanisms of God's universe. What you are saying is that you find it believable that God created a universe filled with evidence to teach us about how the world works, but that evidence shouldn't be believed. Instead, we should believe a book written by primitive people with one foot still in the cave dwelling, rather than everything our God-given human abilities can see in God's universe around us every day. He says, first of all, evolution is simply a collection of observations. If you prefer, you can see the hand of God in action within evolution. I do. I don't see your problem. So what Steve's saying here is that he believes that evolution has been observed. You just observe it. You can see everything's evolving.
It's quite a typical feedback, isn't it?
It actually is. Now Steve's saying that he sees God using evolution.
Right. Okay.
Now we're going to talk about that in another show.
That's right. Theistic evolution. God.
Right.
That's right.
But you see again how he's saying that there's all these observations that we see that we're really evolving, and that we should just believe this, and then somehow make it fit with what the Bible says. But what we're saying, and what you've seen on the show, is that no, we're saying let's look at the observations and then see whether they fit either the creation model or the evolution model.
Right. And we looked at that as well. Some of these news reports, it's difficult to pick out what is observed and what is evolutionary spin or speculation.
Right.
Like the fins on the dolphin, it comes back again. The title seems to suggest a very strong evolutionary positive.
Right.
But you read the article and there's nothing positive for evolution there at all.
Right. So when we get these feedbacks, and when we're out speaking and stuff, and I have someone pose this this kind of I guess proposition that maybe God used evolution, or you can marry the two together, I always just get them to really look at the evidence that they've accepted, or the interpretation of the evidence they've accepted. Oh, the facts for evolution are so strong that somehow, and he even says it, first of all, if you prefer, you can see the hand of God in action within evolution. I do. So he's saying, well, we can just believe God used evolution, and then we don't have a problem with anything. But there are huge theological problems with that.
And that's part of what our speakers are doing. We go around to churches, we try to make that distinction between, look, here are the observations, but be careful, don't be fooled by the interpretation.
Right.
These evolutionary textbooks and programs and magazines and articles and so on are trying to get us to think about the evidence in a particular way.
In a certain way, yeah. So you've got a letter there too?
Yes, yeah, we've got another one here. A disservice to humankind is one of the pull-out text here.
We're getting some of the negative feedback
here.
Yes,
negative feedback. I find your support of the literal interpretation of the Bible quite troubling. To dismiss all physical evidence and ignore thousands of years of scientific discovery is truly a disservice to humankind. God gave us a brain with the ability for rational thought. He goes on to say, you're not using the gifts God gave you. And other things. Genesis is a fun story and a good starting point with many good lessons for children. And if each day in the story were equal to 1 billion years, it comes close to making sense. And he goes on and says things like this.
Right.
Genesis can't be taken seriously. Why? Because of science, because of the data. Right.
Right.
But again, the whole notion of taking the Bible literally, and he's accusing us of this as well, the literal interpretation of the Bible. When we say we're taking the Bible literally, we've really moved away from that term anyways.
Right.
Take it as it's written. Take it in a straightforward sense.
Right, because we know the Bible, some parts are written poetically, and some things might be a parable, but Jesus said when he was teaching in a parable, and some parts of the Bible are very clear, and Genesis is very clearly written as a historical text.
And Hebrew scholars will tell you you've got all the marks of a historical narrative there in Genesis.
Again, he said, ignoring the observations from science. We're not ignoring observations from science.
It's a different interpretation, and I think that's why people think, well, you're just ignoring the observations. But it's not the observations that we're ignoring. We're ignoring the spin that's put on it.
Right.
And then our scientists and our staff members and so on, even you and I write articles on this, but our scientists often are writing the articles they're putting a different spin on the observations.
Right. Because, see, we're talking about the question of origins. You've got two competing models, really. If there is a natural way to explain the existence of everything we see without God, you don't need God.
You don't need
both
God,
of these letters, both people have said, well, they're going to accept evolution as fact, and if they, well, we'll say that God did it, but really, before I became a Christian, I just accepted evolution. There was no reason for me to believe in God because I already had an explanation of where I came from.
That's right. We've been looking at mutations and looking at those observations, and like you said, it's the two-model approach.
Right.
You look at which of those models it fits. And when you do the science, and scientists have, you look at that, it fits creation.